Hello, and welcome to the Culture Track at the third annual Python Web Conference. I'm Laura from 6 Feet Up, and I am thrilled to welcome Uli Hitzel as our next presenter.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome from wherever you are joining us. This is the talk about from code to community. How do you run an open source project? I can tell you that I've been at many conferences, well, as a presenter, but also as a participant. And while I always see, all these exciting things that people build with the projects, I've always wished that somebody would give a talk. So what's this open source thing anyway, if I want to explain it to my mom? Or, how do I get published and how do I run a project like this? And that's what the talk is about today. How do you run an open source project? And I can give you the spoiler right away. This is my last slide. And of course it's not. You take some source code and you dump it on GitHub and you're done. And I think most of you let me just say this is not my first virtual conference. My first virtual conference was, I think, 6 years ago, where we had to reschedule a face-to-face event because of certain unforeseen happenings that suddenly we had to sit in front of a camera looking into the unknown instead of standing on stage, seeing the question marks on people's faces, or having them come to the stage after, or you go for drinks. This is I'm used to this, right? So this is the moment where you laugh about my joke, obviously, but let's keep it light and let's be sure that this is of course not the approach. There is so much more involved, but to be sure, and you'll see in a moment that I've worked in the enterprise business for quite some time. A lot of people, a lot of executives on the customer side, on the vendor side, they think of open source this way. You just dump it on GitHub, and that you call it open source, and you never touch it again. And I think many of you who are listening in today are absolutely clear that this is not the case. But you may have questions about the how, and they may not even be a coder, but how can they contribute? We want to answer that part. A few things about myself. My name is Uli. I'm the chief architect at Care, which is a healthcare provider. I live on LinkedIn, so I'll always appreciate if people take photos of my slides. But at the same time, if you look me up on GitHub, this is my GitHub handle. The slide decks of my talks, including this very one, are on GitHub already. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, if you want to continue the conversation after the presentation, yes, I'll be available for a chat. But you can also reach out via LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to, if time permits, to continue there. On the right side, you see a couple of logos, and those are not my sponsors. They were in the past. So these are stages of my previous life. So you see a couple of well-known enterprise vendors, and I've worked in media and for large web properties as well. While I do appreciate that, actually, I think all of the logos on the right side, they don't need much explanation, and even my mom will have an idea what these companies do. I should say a word about Care. So this is, I'm actually dialing in today from the lovely island of Singapore in Asia Pacific. It's 10 p.m. over here where I'm right now. And we all know, let's not talk about viruses so much, shall we? But we all know that there is a global situation, and we have seen that there is ways to help with the use of technologies, with APIs, with apps and QR codes, and telemedicine, where you can see a doctor without leaving the house. And this is something I'm working on with the team at the moment out of Singapore. And we are looking at making this a much bigger project at the moment. And I'm still looking to hire people, not limited to Singapore. And I'm also still looking to work with business partners all over the world on these efforts. But that's enough with the advertisement. Let's look at the agenda. 5 minutes in, and we have the agenda slide. So how do you run open source projects? This is not a theoretical exercise. I actually want to tell you about one of the projects that I'm running. So this is where it gets a little technical, but I promise that you don't necessarily need to be a developer in order to appreciate what it does. And ultimately, this is part of the story, right? We do open source because we want to achieve participation. And ultimately, there is a call for action that says, get involved. Let's start. So BumbleWeenie is the project, but you will hear about this later. And I think this is what brings me back to what I said at the very beginning of this talk. There is so many incredible libraries, and you see just some of them that you will probably have used. So the requests library, right, for dealing with HTTP requests. I personally use Bottle a lot instead of Django or Flask to build simple POC API endpoints. And actually, the project that I've built is actually using Bottle as well. But I sometimes think when people are using all these projects, it's not limited to Python. It's the same in the. I'm not a big fan of JavaScript, but I appreciate that it's a large part of the web as well. That people are using these libraries and they almost take them for granted. It's almost like they're happening in a parallel universe. Not so many developers that I know are actually questioning on who's behind them, who runs those projects, and they have an idea that must be a group of people, but this is kind of hidden. And we want to talk about these things today, and even why it makes sense and how you can get started. So, if you ask a geek what open source is, and you're not a geek yourself, there is a good chance that you'll get a long story, and at the end, you're still not a lot smarter. So it's not just about my mom. If my dad asks me, what's this open source stuff that you keep telling me about? I think it's really about community-powered innovation. Let's not get into details. You all know how awesome Wikipedia is, right? This is something my boss would understand, where I say, everybody contributes and everybody wins. And in many cases, there was not even money involved, which is just incredible. And look at where Linux has come from being a geek project in the early 90s to, a situation where every stock exchange in the world runs Linux, where basically all the TVs that you have in your house these days are Linux, and all your phones, whether they're from Apple or Samsung or whatever, have Linux or Unix running on them. So it's everywhere. So if you are not a consumer only, but also a contributor, you win on so many ends. So of course, if I deal with people, you've seen the logos basically in my CV, right? Open source is also very scary. So to some people, right? Oh wow, people will see my code. They'll. What do you mean? I have to share my code with other people, and they're not even paying for that. So why would I do that? And I did say let's not talk about COVID and viruses, but we want to the whole digital world today. This is not necessarily open source, but I think the principles are very similar. When there is certain problems, the current pandemic is only one of them, where we realize we can't achieve them as one team anymore. It's got to be several teams, several departments, several companies or even countries who collaborate. And we want to build certain, let's just say, contact tracing apps in 6 weeks, not in 6 months. And we need to get something out of. Let's take another example. I'm in a part of the world where sometimes elections get announced 2 weeks in advance, right? So we got to build something that provides immediate value. So we don't lock us. So if you see this slide on the top, you have the traditional product cycle where somebody wants to build a car and they lock themselves in for 2 years and 3 years, and there is a chance that at the end of the 2-3 years you have a product that's no longer relevant, or It's simply something that people hate. What if there was a different approach where we could take a spin on this and turn this into an agile and sprint discussion, right? Where you build a track first, and then at some point later, when you take all that feedback into account, you turn it into a bicycle. Your ultimate goal may be a car, but you have so much traction, and the world has changed for whatever reason, and suddenly you realize, actually the motorbike is good enough. So it's the open source initiative starts even way earlier, where it's that whole mind shift change from I'll only go public if I have something to show and it's almost ready and I don't make a fool of myself, versus I have an idea about something and it's really just an idea. Maybe I give it a cool name and I do a quick write-up, but that's really all. And I go live with version 0.0.1. And chances are someone in the completely different part of the world will jump on it and say, you know what, I've had exactly the same idea. Let's team up. That's how these things start. And I'll say it again, it's about collaboration. It's about providing value at each stage of the project to various stakeholders for various reasons. Not all projects are seeing the traction they would like to have or they deserve. So it's, besides the coding part, you got to do a lot more. And that's part of our discussion today. Yeah, so if, I've spoken at the Python conference in a face-to-face world, where people come to you and say, you know what, I'm really just joining because I think Python is cool. Everybody talks about Python, but I'm not a programmer. So how can I contribute? And I think by using the software, and then using doesn't necessarily mean it's a library. It could be a project that you run on your desktop, on your phone, on wherever. That if you're opening tickets, opening issues in Git, if you help spreading the word, if you run meetups, if you talk about the use cases, that's contribution. Let's say you are helping to translate documentation into a foreign language, into Chinese, into Bahasa Indonesia, to Mandarin. That is contribution. And of course, code, bug fixes, new features, they all help to strengthen the project and its adoption. Yeah, so why do it? I've already given you a few ideas. I've realized, and in fact, my Red Hat experience, I worked there twice. I worked there in Europe, and I also worked at Red Hat in Asia Pacific. The open source idea is way beyond Linux. It's very much about, making the world a better place by collaborating with each other. And I think you get inspired by this idea, and it also helps you grow individually. You make a lot of connections with people who are in a similar mindset, and they may work for a completely different company in a different country. And if you click on that font, you suddenly become colleagues. You're on the same team on a different payroll. I'll tell you, that's quite an experience. Giving back to the community, it can be rewarding and fun. And sometimes when you walk across town and everybody wants money for whatever nature or good cause they are collecting for, not everybody wants to write checks or do a PayPal subscription for charity. But I do think that many people actually do want to give back to the community to some extent, right? If we talk about what motivates people to contribute to Wikipedia, this is a very similar thing. And how good is that? It's not exactly the App Store, right? It's not the Google Play or the Apple Store, but the Python package index. That's I published one of my packages there, and anybody who knows that pip command can install the library with a super short command. I don't want to say I challenge you. I encourage you to work towards that feeling, right? Pip install B9Y. It's 3 letters. right? Everybody who's dealing with Python can do this, and within seconds they have that up and running. That's very similar to, it's not as visual, I agree, but it's as close as it gets to going to the App Store and downloading a game, and within a few seconds it's running on your phone. You can get there if you're a Python programmer. And look at this. I mean, I just realized this is almost 2 years ago that I got this wonderful email from Dave, who says, congratulations, we liked your project, and we would very much enjoy if you came to San Francisco to speak at the Redis conference about that project that you built on top of Redis. And I could go to my to my team, to my boss, and say, yeah, I really got to go to the US now. Can I get a ticket? And sure enough, it was a lovely conference, and I had a week in San Francisco where these are not photos I Googled. If I'm not a geek, I'm a humanist, and I enjoy the good sides of life, and I enjoy photography. So those are actual photos that I took myself, right? So there is a reward element in it as well. And, coming back to GitHub, it happens to me once a month that a sharp hiring manager or a recruiter reaches out via GitHub because they see how busy my profile there is, and how much I live on GitHub. That's yet another reason for you to get active and get going. So yeah, 17 minutes in. How do you run an open source project? And I'm quoting an acquaintance in the UK, and she brought it to a point very nicely. Surprise, you have to be a developer, right? I guess you knew this already. But you got to be a marketing person to some extent, and a project manager as well. So what does that mean? I mean, the developer part I get, right? You probably have to be your first customer, your first software engineer who, gets not even peanuts to work on the project. Okay. Why marketing? Yeah, well, because there is so many projects out there, and unless you get an audience, it's really just a test balloon without much relevance to what people want to achieve and why you do projects anyway. So the developer part gets you the initial cut of the project, of the code, of what you're looking to build. The marketing person in you that you hopefully develop to be to some extent gets you the attention. So what does the marketing person do? You speak at events, for example, like what I'm doing right now, and you encourage other people to use your stuff and give you feedback, and you can be sure if they use it, they will give you feedback, and it's not all positive, and you will have to improve your product, and that brings you to the next iteration, right? That's where the trike turns into a bicycle, and maybe even a motorbike at some point. Okay, now that we got this part, what was that about the project manager? And I think this is really the point where it deals with the constant change, because if we understand, it's not necessarily related to GitHub alone, right? It's GitLab. It's basically the whole, how do I collaboratively edit and work and maintain source code? There may be people who actually take the contribution seriously, and they'll fork your project, and they want to do a pull request to merge it back in, and then you have to be the guardian and say, yeah, this is awesome, but I want to keep my project very lean and tight, and I don't think this is a good use case. So you have to, make it a habit to work in bug fixes, tell them apart from a revolutionary new feature that you would have wanted to develop yourself, but maybe not for this release, and so on. So that the whole project management aspect comes in there. So if I'm comparing myself, right, to all these successful projects, I'm probably not even here where the pointer is. I think I've had a good cut. I've started, but in order to get it where I would like it to be in my dreams, I would have to do even much more effort. But we can always aim for more. So apart from what you need to be, apart from being a developer, being your own marketing person, being your own project manager, what else should you do? I don't know. What's the steps towards that? And I realize, I probably should have said in my introductions as well. I also teach at the Singapore University over here, teaching DevOps, APIs, automation, the cloud, and all that kind of stuff. I have an increasing number of students who, they don't want to do the Hello World projects. They don't want to do the exercises that you've given them in other instances 1,000 times. They want to solve a real problem. And I still think this is the best way to think about, right? If you are getting the idea and say, you know what, the guy is right? I do want to go to San Francisco. I do agree that there is so much, there are so many good reasons why I should contribute to open source. Which one do I pick? And if I want to start a brand new project, so first of all, if you want to get started, you could actually just pick a project that you're passionate about and help make it better, and then you learn some of the tricks. But if you wanted to start with a brand new project, ideally it's a problem that you need to solve yourself, and you think that I've seen a project like this, but it's not perfect because it uses something else, or it's written in a language that I don't enjoy. Let's build this in Python. And ideally, it's something that you can use for work, in a hobby project, something that you don't have to use it to fly a spaceship to Mars or to run a stock exchange, but something that keeps you productive and going in the real world, and that you'll be using. That is a good project. That is a good start. Yeah, the second part is actually that turning it into a living thing. It's great if you have it running on your laptop, but ideally it needs to live on Git. GitHub is Git plus social, right? So that's where many open source projects live. So that's the whole circus with the versions and the releases, and where people hopefully contribute and do pull requests, where it's got to live there. The code needs to be there, and whenever you build a release, whenever you clone and fork yourself, it needs to be merged back into the main branch on this repository, and to live it in the open. That will be the second thing. And yeah, the third part is market it. There is no way I can underestimate. I can tell you how important it is to give it a name, maybe even have a logo. Even at the beginning, if it doesn't do much, that you have a fantastic documentation. If you're a developer yourself, you are spoiled for choice. There is so many projects out there, and if you have a service on the web, let's take, people always talk about Twilio. I'm a great fan of Twilio myself. You sign up and you get that incredible 20 minutes experience where you get credit, you choose the weapon of your choice. In this case, it's Python, and you're good to go. And they take you by the hand, and you can send SMS via Python curl requests to your phone and trigger voice calls. That's how it should be. Think of it this way. So at the beginning, really, and as a guiding principle as you go along, the code can be awesome, but make that wrapper, make that interface, that human interface, make that extraordinary. And that's where you'll get the usage, and then over time you can make the code even better. If you check me out on GitHub, you see that there is a few projects that I'm running. So youre is an open banking project that exposes financial data, mock data over API points in containers. Keiju is an API gateway. It's a minimum 25 megabyte implementation, and Majime is a framework for API unit testing. But what I wanted to show you today is BumbleWeenie. If I had to bring it to a point, it's a lightweight key value store and message broker based on HTTP REST. And more technically, I will say it's an OAuth, an API wrapper for Redis. So that name sounds familiar to some people, and of course, let's not go into details, but it's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I chose the name to, let's be honest, I chose the name to make sure people don't get the idea to use this in production ever. I failed, right? There's people who are using this on a big scale, and I find this a little scary sometimes because it's really just a POC kind of project, but for some use cases it just seems to work. So what does it do? I realize this is a busy slide that we probably can't cover in depth that it deserves, but I've already said it, right? It's a key value store and message broker that works over HTTP. It allows you to have multiple tenants, multiple keys. Let's just call it key spaces, right? It's fast. It's very easy to use. Back to my point earlier, it's well documented, and the container is also I think just about 25 megabytes. It's using Redis, and it's obviously written in Python. So in very simple terms, if we all know what Redis is, it's a in-memory key value store. It's used almost everywhere across the web, but it's used very close to the server. It's using a TCP protocol, and it's typically not very, very secure. What if we could achieve something very similar in a distributed manner over HTTP, over HTTPS, with a bit of authentication and OAuth around it, right? There's two ways to consume the project. Containers is a different topic, but we know that the containers should be stateless, and that's what you can do, right? You consume an external Redis, but since we are talking about POC and demo projects, you could as well just run it in the default mode, which means it has a stateful Redis service on board inside the container, breaking almost every possible Docker dogma, because this is not a production grade system. So this is the way to interface it, right? So very briefly, there is keys, right? Key value basically, and lists, which allow us to do pop and push, and this is protected with an OAuth API interface. And there is a public way to interface this via routes, which are basically non-authenticated requests to keys, which would allow you to basically host HTTP snippets, static files, and bins, which allow you to dump values into a list via an HTTP form, for example. The interesting part is that there is also a command line tool that just uses the API, just as if you were using Postman or apps. So yeah, REST API. So my use case actually was that I worked for an API management company, and then we always talk about design first. And then I wanted, there was two motivations. One of them is I wanted to have a real project where I start with the REST API at the very beginning. Before I code, the first thing is that I'll bring out Stoplight and design the interface. I think that's the best practice. That's what you should do before you code. You start with the interface. That was one of my motivations. So it has a good API, and it's completely API driven. So in a very simple way, if we ignore the authentication for a moment, you see here the Postman request where I'm simply requesting a key, and you see it gives me hello world. Exciting, right? Yeah, so there is a client library that is available for Windows, for Mac, and for Linux. And you see here on the left side is the library and the bindings that are published with pip and can be downloaded. And you see a small screenshot of the command line interface. Yeah, super easy to run. That was one of my other points, right? Make it easy to consume. And that's the point. If you have Docker running anywhere, not limited to Docker. If you can run containers, if you have OpenShift, Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, Google Cloud Run, Azure Power Apps, whatever it is, you just need to spin up a container and you have the service. So this is just another curl example. Let's assume that the authentication is taken care of by a header. It's simplified here. This is the way for you to retrieve a key. This would be the way you are basically triggering an API put request to set a key to a value. Right? And here's I spoke about that briefly, where you are creating a route to a specific key to expose it in a non-authenticated fashion. Yeah, let's not. I'm looking at the clock. Let's not talk about this one too much. Right? This is basically showing you the various ways of accessing keys and lists, either authenticated or non-authenticated. We'll probably talk a little more about the use cases, because you will say, so what? If building an API is one motivation, what's the other? We'll come to that in a second. Of course, we are paying a price here. I've done a speed comparison. If we have a Redis instance running on the smallest possible instance I could find on the cloud, you see that I can do 56,000 read requests per second, and this is significantly slower to do it over HTTPS. But speed in this case is not the biggest factor for us. It's convenience and it's HTTP. Yeah, so this is we're talking about the use cases. Today is not a meetup. Today is the Python web conference. I do see, this is where it shows again that I've been working for enterprise companies so much in the past with customers. I see scenarios where people go to all these meetups, and yeah, I mean, I use all of these systems, I guess, except Zookeeper at the moment, right? But I sometimes smile about them and I say, these are these science fiction tools where everybody dreams about. Everybody dreams about running Google scale infrastructure, and they go back to their office, and it's almost like you step into a time machine, because they don't even have the absolute minimum of what it means today to run digital infrastructure. And it would be much more interesting to talk about containers, and having, you don't need Kubernetes to start with containerization and have 10, 20, 30 containers running. You may need something else, but let's start with the simple things first. And this is where it's born, right? If we are, and my use case specifically was, you have POCs to do in a regulated environment, in financial services or in the public sector, where everything is fenced off from each other. How can you provision infrastructure on the cloud or on other servers on premise if the firewall is so strict, right? So that's where I got to, what if we could put all of this on HTTP, right? Where even the command line that uses just API HTTP requests, authentic API requests to manipulate information and retrieve it. And we want to show how awesome APIs are, right? And here's you see a small project called Kaleidoscope, which is more like a kiosk system where you can enable backend systems to maybe display monitoring information in your war room, in your monitoring room, or in this case, where you can basically run a distributed way of students or a large audience who are looking at the same content, whether it's images, text, markdown files, or videos, at the same second. And there is an instructor who presses the button, and it's basically a different version of Zoom, if you want, just it's working very differently and without much network traffic. Yeah, this is actually the second part, and I do hope that you check out the project, because you can do some cool stuff on APIs. You even can have a feature that helps you to nest keys. So in this case, I appreciate that you're looking at code. In this case, it's actually a mix of the command line interface with curl, where you are defining a message, and you see there's that shebang and the ampersand and the brackets, where in the second command you will actually set the message itself. And when you're creating this public accessible route for the key API, you can say whenever somebody accesses it, I want the content type to be application JSON in UTF-8. And whenever somebody does that curl request, they will get that JSON response, which will be passed dynamically. So if you go to the command line and set message to, well, something else, or if you have a backend process, or it's basically that communication engine where all kinds of systems, as long as they can speak HTTP, they're able to access this thing. And the point that I had earlier, it's incredibly easy to set up. It's not meant for production. The idea is to get you really quick, getting started really quick if you do a POC, if it has to run today, because the show and tell is on Friday. Right? If you don't have the time, the approval, the budget, the credits to run Kubernetes somewhere, and you really just want to show executives and your customers how APIs work. And I'll tell you, right, for 400 requests per second is fantastic for a test environment. Right, so that's what we are using it for. This is my last slide. Getting involved, right? So open source lives from participation, right? Community-powered innovation, that is the motto. It's only as good as it gets. People step in, people help make it better, people try it out, people open bugs. I hope you do the same. You have a look. There is a, I should have put something else on one of the slides. Oh, people see my code. They're not even paying for it. And in this case, I could add, I have a good number of people who downloaded the container, and I don't even know how these people are. Sometimes they reach out. It's incredible to see that they are almost from all of the continents. Have not had anybody from Antarctica yet. But yeah, spread the word, try it out, get involved. At the moment, you've seen where I have landed from a work perspective, so I don't have much time to maintain open source projects. I'm happy if somebody joins the team. That's it for me. Back to Laura, and let's see if there is questions.